Hello, today we're going to be talking about the case study of CEMEX, and in our group we have Fedor, Annie, Evgeny, Max and Satyam. We will first start with giving a quick introduction with the background of the CEMEX company. We'll be talking about the globalization of CEMEX and then move on to their financial challenges and our future perspectives for CEMEX. CEMEX was created in 1931 in Mexico. It was formed from a merger between two companies, Cementos Hidalgo and Cementos Portland Monterrey, and they merged to form the company Cementos Mexicanos, also known as CEMEX. CEMEX is a buildings material major. It's the world's largest cement trader and the third largest producer of cement, and today it operates in over 50 countries. Our first question is, what drove CEMEX to go global? We conclude there are four main reasons, being timing, increase in competition, profit maximization, and satisfying the global demand. It started with the consolidation of the cement industry with other industries, so there was a bigger international demand for cement, which meant more companies were deciding to globalize, which meant there was also an increase in competition, meaning a lot of companies were acquiring smaller companies in more countries. So CEMEX had to either face being acquired by one of the bigger companies or itself become globalized and become an international competitor in the cement industry. Technology played a big part, as the advances in technology meant it was easier for cross-country communication and transport. And then profit maximization. In order to profit maximize, you have to take advantage of the increase in the global demand and benefit from economies of scale, which are both things that come out of globalizing your company. Our next question is CEMEX a multinational enterprise? We answered yes, as it fills the criteria of an M&E because it has headquarters in its home country in Mexico with foreign branches. They operate in over 50 countries, being North and South America, Europe and Asia. They also have its affiliates and business partners are linked together by a common strategic vision.
We will now be going over the key competitive advantages which CEMEX possess, beginning by perhaps the most decisive one of all, which is the unique operational strategy known as the CEMEX way. This is more of an acquisition strategy that allows all the firms that CEMEX acquired to integrate successfully. This was invented by Lorenzo Zambrano, who was the chairman of CEMEX Ways and perhaps the most important key figure in the entire organization, to the extent that the Wall Street Journal had called him a swashbuckling pioneer in Mexico who had created the first true multinational enterprise from Mexico, which were huge words for a journal such as the Wall Street. Moving on, they also had very unique marketing and branding approaches. The marketing approach, it shook up the way that people saw cement. Now, initially, cement was seen as unluxurious commodity that people would prefer not to spend their money on if they could help it. But what they changed was they began a program called CEMEX in the United States, which had allowed their Mexican relatives in the United States to easily spend money in the States at a CEMEX shop, and immediately after that, the building materials would be delivered to the relatives in Mexico itself. Essentially, it had a direct selling point in America, and that allowed, that forced a lot of the expenditure to go towards cement, as opposed to the previous, which was to send a remittance back to their home country, and then the relatives would spend it however they would want to. Moving on, they also had correct and an appropriate branding strategy when they went for an umbrella brand for the entire company. All of their acquisitions were known as CEMEX, and this helped increase the goodwill of the brand as well as increase global recognition. And last but not least, of course, the taking advantage of the economies of scale. We will now be going over all of the reasons why CEMEX had ventured into Spain. Actually, CEMEX had initially planned to venture into the United States. However, this was an unsuccessful venture due to the threat from the local domestic competitors in the form of anti-dumping bill against CEMEX. This had resulted in them opting to go to different country as a result of that unsuccessful venture, and they decided to go to Spain. Why Spain? Why not Portugal? Why not UK? Well, we hope to answer that question and provide insight by giving you the cage distance framework. So to begin with, we'll be differentiating the cultural distance, which actually has not much of a distance at all, due to the fact that they're both Latin countries who share the same language, the same religion, as well as having similar social norms, both being Latin countries. Next, we'll be going over the administrative distance between the two. You'll find here that this factor is also favorable to both of the countries, as Spain and Mexico both are currently enjoying an amicable and friendly relationship, as well as the fact of having historical colonial ties. Next, we'll be explaining the geographical distance between the two. Now, of course, the most glaring problem to an outsider is the enormous ocean between these two countries. However, the fact that there is an ocean does provide a benefit, because both these countries have large coastlines, and as a result, there's increased incentive to trade. Furthermore, entering into Spain allowed them to gain a foothold into Europe, which is perhaps one of the most important parts at this point. Next up, we will be talking about the economical distance between the two. It goes without saying that Spain is a very developed country, and as a result, their GDP is higher than Mexico. However, the main point here is that CEMEX had ventured into Spain due to the fact that they could own a port in Spain and gain them access to vital infrastructural power. We'll now be talking about why CEMEX had opted for an acquisition strategy. But in order to do that, first we'll provide some context on two factors. Number one is the acquisition criteria for CEMEX, and secondly, it is their CEMEX way, or in other words, their integration strategy. The first factor of their acquisition criteria was to have a return on investment which would be well above the cost of capital invested to begin with. Secondly, would be to maintain this financial strength of the company, as well as keep the credit quality high. And lastly, the management expertise of CEMEX should provide value and increase the strengths of their acquired members. Next up, we'll be talking about the CEMEX way, which was their integration strategy, and a vital reason as to why CEMEX was successful at all. As mentioned previously, this was innovated by Lorenzo Zambrano, and it involves the standardization of processes, or at least for the most part. Now, what do I mean by the most part? Well, Zambrano insisted that each organization has some practices, some cultures which are rigid, which no matter what an outsider says, you cannot change. But there are practices which work in all places if it worked in one place. For example, if we were to have no mobile phones in a meeting, we would have that rule everywhere, and this would be a good practice. Now that is what he applied by the standardization. All of the companies that he acquired, he had enforced that 80% of the practices were to be standardized, but there would be a 20% room to have practices that were culturally relevant to wherever they were. This is directly involved in the second point of new governance. When a company is acquired, they're forced to take over this standardization, and thus they would be operating completely differently. And finally, Lorenzo Zambrano insisted that all of the companies, now this was special at the time due to the fact that it being more than a few decades ago, was to be e-enabled. And that means to essentially all of the services and goods that you provide, you should be able to access them online. We will now be going over as to why CEMEX had opted for an acquisition strategy as compared to something else, beginning with synergy. What we mean by synergy is essentially when you combine more than one force together, it should result in a stronger output or a higher output or productivity, in this case for CEMEX and the acquired company. Secondly is the rapid growth. Now the word rapid here is really important because if they had opted, for example, to start from scratch in a different country or a new market, then that would obviously be a lot more slower than simply buying out an already functioning operating company. And secondly, the point here was that CEMEX themselves demonstrated that they were very serious and determined about their company because they had gotten all of their operations ready within a few months' time. Next point is the reduction of prices. This would happen through the direct purchasing of distributors or suppliers that would otherwise charge CEMEX for using their services. The next point is elimination of competition. By directly acquiring a player in the market, obviously you wouldn't have to go against that player, and thus it would be beneficial towards CEMEX. Next up is consolidation, which is more of a factor of the environment, or the industry rather, as the cement industry was experiencing a lot of consolidation at this moment in time, and CEMEX were either forced to eat or get eaten. The next part is the coincidence of internet boom alongside the globalization. So the internet boom had allowed CEMEX to have the accessibility both in terms of transport as well as communication with whoever they wanted to acquire, and this would not have been possible 2 decades prior. The next point is the creation of value. So CEMEX had opted to initially go for developing markets and underperforming companies, or rather acquiring these types of companies, and they would create value by adding on their own expertise to these teams. The last point is the CEMEX way. CEMEX were quite simply too confident, or appropriately confident, in their excellent integration strategy known as the CEMEX, where they had complete confidence to get all of the companies they acquire running in the same direction as them.
We will now be going over between the similarities between the three companies, Lafarge, Holcim, and CEMEX, beginning by explaining or expanding upon our Porter's Five Forces analysis. We found that there's a low threat of new entrants due to the fact that the cement industry has consolidated, as well as the fact that there are many big players who could easily acquire new entrants and eliminate them from the market. We found that the threat of substitute products to be low, simply because cement is a commodity which is a basic commodity which cannot be substituted very easily. We found that the bargaining power of our buyers is at around a medium level, and that's because, similar to the first point, our cement industry is pretty consolidated, it's saturated, and as a result, our customers can opt for our competitors as opposed to us. And finally, we found that the competition to be intense between the competitors, and this is because of the, again, consolidation of the market. Furthermore, these companies were similar in their approach in that they had preferred to purchase underperforming companies in developing markets and provide value by adding their own expertise. Furthermore, they also acquired companies in similar regions and similar markets such as Europe, Latin America.
So in order for CEMEX to solve the cash crunch problem, we came up with 4 different solutions which we think are the most important ones to help them out in this difficult situation. The major one is that they need to focus in cement and ready-mix industries, which include that the world cement right now and production and consumption increase from year to year, as well as there is a high demand for cement in Asian part, which is a potential market for CEMEX to move in. And the last point is that cement is the most profitable building material right now, which means it's really cost effective as well as adaptive for CEMEX to consider. The second point is the CEMEX needs to develop Asian and Middle East markets because there's a really low international competition. Another really important point to consider, and our solution is for this problem, is that CEMEX needs to improve the credit rating by taking the risk management into the account. And finally, the CEMEX needs to penetrate the existing market if it wants to solve the cash crunch problem. So is nationalization for industries a threat for M&Es? First of all, nationalization is when government decides to take over a company or industry in any particular country. The answer to the question is yes. However, it depends on the country, such as USA and EU being liberal economies versus developing economies, and the extent to which the government is committed to liberal economy. It also depends on the industry, because some industries are more likely to be nationalized than others. There is always a risk which doesn't prevent M&Es from entering potentially dangerous markets. But meanwhile, the benefits outweigh potential threats. So we came up with some recommendations for globalization strategies for CEMEX. The very first recommendation I want to give is that CEMEX establishes a joint venture with local companies in new markets. Another really important point to mention is that vertical integration of the supply chain is another recommendation. For example, the construction companies. Furthermore, the global presence right now of CEMEX is very low in comparison with other competitors. So it needs to continue the strategy of expansion through global mergers and acquisitions. Thirdly, the CEMEX has presence in 15 countries right now. So to avoid hostile takeover, CEMEX should enter new markets, which will help the company expanding its global presence. We also have some minor recommendations for CEMEX to take account, such as it should invest in R&D and quality initiatives for product differentiation, improve processes and reducing costs. We also suggest continue its use of IT, which will help reduce the cost and make efficient supply chain management. Lastly but not least, CEMEX should invest in technological advancements for developing higher quality cements.